Hello again and welcome back to the channel. In this video we're going to be looking at the organization of life. We're going to talk about why organisms need internal organization. We're going to talk about what living things are made up of. We're going to also discuss the order of organization within organisms. And then finally, we'll deal with some of the components and functions of the main organ systems of the human body. So let's get into it. Okay, so on the first page, you've got a diagram that takes you through the levels of organization. You start off with chemicals, which are not living things. And then the chemicals are grouped into molecules, still not living things. And then those molecules can be grouped into cells. Cells are the smallest or most basic level of life. Cells then need to be organized further into tissues, and then tissues into organs, organs into organ systems, and then organ systems into fully functioning organisms. So let's go into how this all works. So the level of organization within organisms is listed in order of increasing complexity. Try to describe them in a concise or in as concise a manner as possible. So let's start off with cells. So as I said earlier, these are the most basic or smallest units of life. And all organisms are made up ultimately of cells. Next level up, tissues. So tissues are groups of cells which work together to perform functions. So as I've already stated there, examples would be heart tissue, blood vessels, blood, and so on. Okay, so let's go on to the next level up, which is organisms. Organs. So these are made up of tissues which perform related functions. And an example of that would be the heart or the lungs and so on. The next level up would be organ systems. These are groups of organs which carry out related functions. So you can see that there's a pattern emerging as we go up from one level to the next. Each level or each subsequent level is made up of the cells in the structures in the previous level. So organisms are self-contained living things made up of cells. Now, some organisms are unicellular, which means that they only have one cell, but other organisms can be multicellular, which means that they're made up of several cells, and those cells have to be grouped in order to carry out their functions efficiently. So the next stage, we're going to start discussing some of the organ systems within the human body. So let's start off with the nervous system. The nervous system is divided into two main sections, the CNS and the PNS. What are those short for? So the CNS is the central nervous system, and it's made up of the brain and spinal cord. And its function or functions processes information and makes decisions. And then it sends the instructions that result from those decisions around the body. Now we're going to talk about how the information gets to the central nervous system and how it's then carried, or instructions are then carried around the body. So the PNS is the peripheral nervous system, and that's made up of things like neurons, receptors, etc. And the functions here are to carry information and instructions around the body. So that's the nervous system. The next system we're going to discuss is the circulatory system. In the circulatory system, we're going to talk about some of the organs and tissues within it, and it already states what the function is in the diagram. So it transports oxygen, nutrients, and so on around the body. It also contains the body's defense mechanisms against foreign invaders. So, organs and tissues within the circulatory system. The most obvious is the heart, which is a muscular pump which provides the force needed to move blood around the body. So let's put that actually in red. And then you've then got blood vessels, which are basically tubes or pipes which carry blood around the body. And they include things like veins, arteries, and capillaries. And they also facilitate the exchange of substances between the tissues of the body and the blood. So capillaries, for instance, have very thin walls which allow for substances to be moved between tissues and the blood. Finally, we've got the blood itself, which is also a tissue. Because if you think about it, it's a group of cells which carry out related functions, and that's the actual definition of a tissue. So blood transports substances around the body and defends it against pathogens. Okay, so those are the component parts of the circulatory system and the functions of each of those components. The next level up is the skeletal system. So in the skeletal system, let's start off with the job of the skeletal system. So it protects the body's internal organs, it helps the body to remain upright, it also facilitates movement when coupled with the muscular system, which is why sometimes it's grouped together as the musculoskeletal system, but let's keep them separate for now. So let's talk about the different components of the skeletal system. So the most obvious would be bones. These keep the body upright, protect internal organs, make blood cells, etc. The next step up, another group of tissues would be cartilage. And this is softer than bone. And it forms structures like the nose, for instance. So parts of the nose are actually kept upright or given their structure by the presence of cartilage. So next step, or the next tissue we will discuss. Actually, let's leave that for now. So we've got two examples there of tissues within the skeletal system. Next, let's look at the muscular system. So the most obvious bit of the muscular system is the muscle. And muscles are tissues made up of cells which are capable of contracting and relaxing, for instance, to facilitate movement. So that's muscles. You can also have within this group, rather than in the skeletal system, though it could be in either, would be tendons. These attach muscle to bones. So that's the muscular system. Amongst the most important systems within the human body are the reproductive systems, because without the reproductive systems, you can't make more humans. So here we've got some of the different organs and tissues actually labeled on the diagram. So in this case, rather than or unlike the previous systems, we're going to talk instead about the functions of the female reproductive system. So hormones. So they make and secrete hormones. These prepare the body for reproduction. It makes and releases gametes. And gametes are reproductive cells. In the case of the female reproductive system, it also nurtures the growing baby during pregnancy. Let's go on to the male reproductive system. So yet again, it has a job with regard to hormones. So makes and secretes hormones which regulate fertility. So in essence, it controls the reproductive abilities of the male. So that's really the main job of the male reproductive system in humans. It's somewhat less complicated than the female reproductive system and has fewer jobs. In essence, it just makes loads of hormones, and it also makes sperm. In quite large quantities. So makes the male reproductive cells. So those are two of the functions of the male reproductive system. It also acts as a delivery system for those gametes. So it acts as a delivery system for sperm. So it basically is capable of introducing the sperm into the female. Let's go on to the respiratory system. So the respiratory system is really involved with gaseous exchange. It's called the respiratory system, but that's a bit of a misnomer. Misnomer means that the name doesn't really tell you what its job is. So instead it has it suggests that it has a different job. The actual job of a respiratory system isn't respiration. Instead, it brings about the gaseous exchange, which helps to facilitate respiration within cells. So it helps to bring in oxygen into the body and removes carbon dioxide and water vapor. So let's talk about some of the organs and tissues within this system. So we've got the lungs. These organs facilitate gaseous exchange between the body and the air in the outside world. So it basically acts as an interface between the body's internal environment and the external environment. As well as the lungs, we've also got the bronchi, and the trachea, or the trachea, whichever pronunciation you prefer. And these tubes carry air in and out of the lungs. And then finally, once I make this a bit neater, and then finally we've got the mouth and nose, which are the openings through which gas goes in and out of the body. So openings for movement of air. So that's the respiratory system. Now on to the digestive system. So as I've already mentioned before, the role of the digestive system is to break down large complex molecules into smaller, simpler ones for absorption into the body. So two main jobs: breaks down the food and then it absorbs the nutrients. So let's talk about some of the organs and tissues involved here. Let's start off at the beginning with the mouth, which chews or cuts and chews food. It also mixes food with saliva to start digestion. So the saliva actually contains salivary amylase, which starts the breakdown of starch, which is a complex carbohydrate. From the mouth, the food then goes down the esophagus, which is a muscular tube connecting the mouth to the stomach. So muscular tube connecting mouth to stomach. We then have the stomach, which is a muscular sac in which proteins are digested. And then one last set of organs and tissues, even though this won't be an exhaustive list, it won't be a list of everything, would be the small intestine. Where digestion is completed. Digestion is completed and nutrients absorbed. So that's the digestive system. So far we've looked at the organization of life from cells through tissues to organs, organ systems, and then organisms. And so beyond that, we then talked about the fact that, in fact, all living things are made up of cells. Unicellular living things are made up of single cells, whereas multicellular living things are made up of multiple cells, sometimes trillions of them. And as a result, they need to be organized in order to carry out their functions. So let's summarize what we've done so far. So life requires organization to make processes occur more efficiently, as I already said. So if you've got trillions of cells, you've got to have a system that enables them to carry out their functions efficiently. We then talked about cells being the smallest units of life, what we call cell theory. All living things are made up of cells. And then we went on to tissues. So tissues are groups of cells which perform functions. So for instance, something like blood cells or blood, which contains blood cells, which are involved in transporting substances around the body, such as oxygen in red blood cells, and it also enables the body to fight off invading pathogens. The next step up would be organs. So these are usually self-contained structures which are made up of tissues which perform related functions. So things like the heart and lungs and so on. And then the next step up from there would be organ systems, which are groups of organs which carry out related functions, such as the digestive system. And then you end up with organisms, which are self-contained living things. And they could be single-celled or they could be multicellular. And then finally, we talked about how multicellular organisms are organized in order to carry out their functions. I hope that you found that video useful. If you did, could you please press the like button below? And if you would like to be notified of future videos, press the subscribe button. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.